President John Tyler would not serve a second term in the White House, but 3 days before he left office, he would accomplish the denouement of his presidency, the annexation of Texas. Our story, however, does not end there. The new president, James K. Polk, would use executive privilege, obfuscation, intimidation, mendacity, and war to secure not only Texas for the United States, but the Southwest and California as well, all as a justifiable expression of America's manifest destiny. Furthermore, Polk's insensitivity to the growing tension around slavery's expansion would lead to further tears in the fabric of white American society. Hi, I'm Tom Army, and this is another challenging episode of U.S. History Online. This is part 2 of the Mexican War, or the United States invasion of Mexico, a line in the sand. After Abel Upsher's tragic death, Secretary of State John C. Calhoun continued to negotiate with Texas over annexation. But the Lone Star Nation felt it did not have the resources and Texans' support for annexation. Consequently, President Tyler proposed that if all Texan lands would be given to the United States, the Texas debt up to $10 million would be paid by the United States. Along with this, the treaty stated that Texas would receive military protection against an invasion from Mexico. The Tyler-Texas Treaty failed to pass through the Senate in the spring of 1844 with the necessary 2/3 vote. In December 1844, when the House and Senate returned from its recess, the nation had a new president-elect, James K. Polk. Polk had campaigned on a Texas annexation platform, and he won a decisive victory over his opponent, Henry Clay. Tyler declared Polk's victory a mandate on Texas annexation and immediately asked Congress to adopt a joint resolution on the Texas question. A joint resolution would only need simple majorities from both legislative chambers. The House bill contained the same conditions that appeared in the Tyler-Texas Treaty. Southern Democrats recognized that although there were enough votes to pass the bill in the House, it would never pass in the Senate, where the Whigs held the majority, 28-24. So Representatives Milton Brown, a Whig, and Ephraim Foster, another Whig, both from the president-elect's home state of Tennessee, added an amendment to the Tyler Treaty on January 13th, 1845. The amendment had 3 provisions. It called for Texas to enter the Union as a slave state. It granted Texas lawmakers the right to configure 5 new states from the western region, each pre-authorized to permit slavery. It allowed the U.S. government to negotiate a Texas boundary dispute with Mexico, making the Rio Grande River serve as a boundary was exceedingly favorable to the U.S. since its headwaters were in the Rocky Mountains. The bill, with the amendment, passed in the House 118 to 101. The Senate, with its Whig majority, however, would prove a tougher nut to crack. The negotiations in the Senate centered on Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri, the only Southern Democrat who had voted against the Tyler-Texas Treaty back in the spring of 1844. Benton worked out an amendment with his Senate colleagues. They called for 5 bipartisan commissioners to resolve the border dispute and set the conditions for annexation. The eastern portion of Texas would include slavery, but the western portion would remain unorganized and consequently not committed to slavery. Polk urged Senate Democrats to unite under a dual resolution, a dichotomous bill that would include the Benton-Brown-Foster version of annexation. When Polk became president on March 4th, 1845, he would decide what version of the bill he would follow. Privately, Polk told each side what they wanted to hear. President Tyler signed the bill on March 1st, 1845. Then, on Tyler's last day in office, the president, at the urging of Secretary of State Calhoun, sent Texas the resolution exclusively under the Brown-Foster offer. As the new president, Polk had selected the Brown position as well. And he continued to strong-arm Texas to accept the U.S. offer. Polk kept his efforts confidential. And when Benton and Senate Whigs requested the administration disclose its Texas policy, the president said nothing, claiming executive privilege. So when Congress went into a recess between June and December 1845, they were left in the dark. Texas debated the resolution and finally agreed to the Brown-Foster plan. The president signed the joint resolution in December, and Texas finally became a state. One of the unique features of the annexation agreement was a provision permitting Texas to retain title to its public lands. From the start of Polk's tenure, the president considered the annexation of Texas not enough. He also wanted Mexico to sell him California. As early as April 1845, Polk began to formulate a covert plan to force Mexico to sell the United States California. The president called Secretary of the Navy George Bancroft into his office. Bancroft was an impressive figure. As a scholar and diplomat, he, along with Emma Willard and Susanna Rowson, is known among scholars as one of the founders of what historians consider the Romantic nationalist period in American history. This period emphasized progress, liberty, and Anglo-Saxon destiny. On the day he met with Polk, he learned one of the president's priorities: the acquisition of California. As historian Amy S. Greenberg pointed out, quote, Polk felt a deep disdain for the racially mixed population of Mexico, end quote. He believed that Mexican leaders were both corrupt and cowardly. He would not need war. Bluster and bullying would suffice. Saber rattling would convince the leaders of Mexico to sell him California. Unfortunately, Polk's plan would prove a grave miscalculation. Polk ordered Bancroft to send Commodore Robert Stockton of USS Princeton fame to Galveston, Texas, to meet Polk's trusted emissary, Charles Wickliffe. Wickliffe quietly had tried to start a war between Texas and Mexico over the boundary dispute. Mexico believed it was the Nueces River, and Texas believed it was the Rio Grande. He had spread false rumors that Mexican soldiers had crossed the Rio Grande. In the meantime, the president sent word to Major General Zachary Taylor to move 4,000 soldiers to Corpus Christi on the northern edge of the disputed territory and await further orders. As Taylor moved his army, Whig and abolitionist newspapers feared Mexico's outrage over Texas statehood would lead Mexico to declare war. The National Intelligencer warned that any military action taken by the United States against Mexico would constitute an offensive war and not the necessary defense of Texas. The New York Tribune claimed, quote, "Soon our army will be on the Rio Grande do Norte, with the flag of freedom at their head and an endless procession of slaves in their rear," end quote. In August 1845, Polk heard from another one of his secret agents, William Parrott. Parrott was in Mexico City and reported that the Mexican government appeared conciliatory. If the president sent an emissary, the two sides might be able to negotiate a settlement. Polk agreed to send Spanish-speaking Congressman John Slidell of Louisiana as his special envoy. Slidell's mission was to persuade Mexico to accept a permanent boundary along the Rio Grande and cede all Mexican territory to the United States. That territory would eventually become Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Nevada, and portions of Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and Wyoming. Polk told Slidell to offer the Mexican government $15 million. However, he could go as high as $40 million. If Slidell failed in his mission, the president said, quote, "We must take redress for the wrongs and injuries suffered into our own hands," end quote. Polk continued the United States would seek the proper remedies and declare war on Mexico. Slidell arrived in Mexico in December, shortly after the U.S. officially annexed Texas. Negotiations broke down before they even began. Mexican public opinion and all political factions believed that selling the territories to the United States, plus recognizing Texas independence, would tarnish their national honor. Some, including President Jose Joaquin, opposed direct conflict with the U.S. So why was Slidell invited to meet with Mexican leaders? Did Polk send Slidell to Mexico to broker a fair deal? Or was Slidell's mission designed to ensure that diplomacy would fail? The answers to these questions will be taken up next time on Part 3 of United States History Online, The Mexican War, or the United States Invasion of Mexico, Mr. Polk's War.